When people begin to play Osu, they often have one question. What's the hardest map in the game? Which is immediately where you run into a problem. Mostly unranked maps and mods. This is because, while yes, Yomiuri 4 mod would be one of the hardest maps in the game, it's probably impossible. And so, for this video, we're going to take a slightly different approach to difficulty. Un-FC'd maps. There's long been a goal from players to FC every ranked map in the game. And surprisingly enough, there was a time where nearly every ranked map was able to be FC'd by top players. Well, except a few. This is the history of trying to wipe away those few. The attempt to FC every single map in the game. I have to begin with a few asterisks to put on this. First is that this is the history of trying to FC the oldest ranked maps in the game. This is because there are many recently ranked maps that don't even have passes, but the farther back you go, the easier the maps get. But these are still the outliers, the ones that couldn't be FC'd at the time they were ranked, and have slowly been crept upon by the general player skill increase. This also means that most of these will be no-mod plays. And so with that out of the way, let's get into the insane history of trying to FC these maps. Let's begin with a super quick rundown of each map that was un-FC'd in 2016, starting with Shotgun Symphony. A horrid map that was rated only 5 stars, but had patterns that would almost certainly make it one of the hardest in the entire list. Kirby Mix Compilation, a 10-minute map with uncomfortable patterns and aight. Because Maybe, Part 2 and 3. One, a 17-minute AR9 map that still reaches 6.4 stars in difficulty, and the other, a 22-minute long map that, while having a more conventional design, is over 7.5 stars.
So Cry Thunder gets nerfed.
Ryoshi no Umi Ludwardo, a map set which crops up multiple times on this list because of its difficulties that require extreme 280 BPM alternating and aim control. My Spear Will Go On, a killer map which is 7.5 minutes in length and AR 8.5. It also requires some pretty impressive stream aim when combined with the reading. Worldwide Choppers, an extremely difficult alt map which uses patterns that require a lot of finger control, aim control, and speed that just wasn't around when it was ranked. Genryo Kaiko, a map with consistently spaced 160 BPM streams and a strange design. And then, finally, there were the maps that were seen as near impossible. Namely the 3 Mazarin maps on the list, those from Whom the Heavens Came and Cosmic Cortex, which were both extremely high in technical difficulty, but also required a ton of speed stamina and consistency. And then there's one more map that just transcends seemingly impossible, into the realm of, yeah, no. The Apparition, a currently 8.37 star map, which, get this, speed changes from 240 to 270 BPM streams, and extreme jump sections. In 2016, it would have needed a miracle, since no individual player had the stream stamina alone to play the map, and there was certainly no one who had the jump aim on top of that. So, there are all the un-FC'd ranked maps at the time, the oldest un-FC'd maps in the game. Now it's time to see how they crumbled. Let's start with the ones that proved not to be quite as bad as the others. Mainly Ryoshi, which was FC'd the day after the post by aight. The other diffs would also go on to be FC'd fairly easily. And then next was surprisingly Worldwide Choppers.
Let's just pretend that's an FC. Like, doesn't matter.
Let's start with what was the oldest ranked map without an FC at the time, Shotgun Symphony. Shotgun Symphony is a pretty perfect map to show why most wouldn't be so easy. This is because it's the perfect representation of what the hardest no-mod maps ever looked like at the time. It's a 5-star map, which at first might seem like an absurdly low number. But once you take into account that it was a 5-star from 2012, it starts to make more sense. Until you realize that Image Material was ranked the same year, and it didn't even make it onto the list. So, why then? Well, if you've been looking at the map, you might be able to tell. because this map is absolutely disgusting. It's really the only word I could find to describe it. Patterns that are the exact opposite of normal distance spacing, and a circle size and approach rate and slider velocity that make the map not only exceptionally difficult, but downright revolting to play for most. I say for most, because of one person. The not yet champion above champions, GN, who set out to be the first FC on this legendary map in December of 2016. The thing was that even for a reading god like him, the nonsensical patterns and vomit-inducing design caused a lot of trouble. And after a stupidly impressive 2-miss after hundreds of attempts that year, he would quit the map, leaving it in a sort of limbo where it seemed unlikely to ever be FC'd. That is, until an entire year later, when he came back to the map and did this. He'd finally chipped one map off the list, after over a year of effort. And luckily this wasn't the only reading heavy map that would be taken out of the equation, because Wobblefulf would go on to become the first and only person to FC the Curry Mix compilation. And that wasn't all, because Genryo Kaiko would also be beaten by Mappy, which meant that there were 5 down, and only 12 to go. But these 12 maps were a bit different, because although the maps that were already mentioned were difficult because of unintuitive design and length, both of which could be overcome through memorization, these maps needed an actual technical increase in player skill. But still, it was 2018. It had been almost 2 years since the original list, and yet most of the maps still seemed pretty out of reach. Why? Well, there were a few things. Kakizi taking a break, and the majority of the top 10 being pretty uncompetitive, with Mappy being really the only breakout player during this time. And his skill set was much more suited for fast maps, which just didn't crop up on the list that much. This meant that even after the already large time that players had spent attempting these maps, there was still a sizable gap between these FCs and what would happen next, with an entire year passing, with not a single map being taken off the list. But, finally, 3 years after list creation, progress finally began in 2019, because of a few people. The players who are basically the protagonists of our story. Vaxe, and most of all, Idki. Vaxe, who had taken a break until that year, and came back as who was probably the most technically skilled player in the entire game. And Idki, who had both number 1 level flow aim, and an extremely well-rounded playstyle, which made him perfect for the task. And it all started with one map, Rainbow Dash Likes Girls, in January of 2019, because after a bounty was put onto the map, Vaxe FC'd it within a single day. This was the first of the maps above the 7-star mark, and it finally began the end of the wall that had seemed to loom over the players up until that point. And later that month, Idki would make 2 of the dumbest plays in the entire game, on one of the craziest maps on the entire list, Fast-Paced Society, when he'd get a pretty nuts FC on the map. And then, just a single day later, a mind-boggling Hard Rock FC, despite the map having only 5 passes with the mod at the time. This already starts to outline why Idki was so good at making these records, since so many of the seemingly doable ones were stamina-based or consistency-based. And this would only be exemplified further through what he'd do next. When in one of the craziest map sagas ever, he FC'd all 3 Because Maybe maps. This is an hour of maps that range from extremely difficult, with numbers 1 and 2, to an absolute consistency nightmare with part 3, since Idki FC'd that one with Hard Rock. This took 2 of the most daunting maps off the list. And this wasn't all, because he'd then FC My Spirit Will Go On, taking out 3 maps of extreme length and difficulty off the list. Through Idki's mental resilience and other players' insane attempts on the maps, only one kind of map was left. what I'll call the final frontier. The maps which no one could even get close to an FC on. There were the Mazard maps, which were both extremely technical, and at the same time were very clearly not designed for comfortability, all of which had double-digit miscounts as their best score, and then Speed of Link, which at first seems difficult because of its 285 BPM streams. But the funny part is that this isn't even the worst of it, because a player like Gaze, and certainly one like Murami, wouldn't have that hard of a time on 7.5 star 285 BPM streams. But the finger control and aim required made it mentally, physically, and technically demanding. So how could all these maps be taken down? Well, once again, it's aight. There's legitimately no way to describe his ability on these maps. Like, was he even playing the same game as everyone else? A 28 miss to a 1 slider break. He had legitimately done the impossible, and he had proved that he was the hope the list needed. But sadly, it was still one of the 3 left going into 2020. With it, Speed of Link and Apparition being the last maps left to FC. The only thing about these maps is that they were unorthodox in how they got their difficulty. This meant that despite players like Whitecap popping up, there still seemed to be no one who could play them. And so, throughout the entire first half of the year, very little happened. Until one player came along. Bubbleman. As one of the best rounded, most consistent players in the entire game, he would have something to say about it. When he FC'd Speed of Link, picking one of the 3 behemoths off the list. Finally, only 2 maps were left. The 2 of the original 3 Mazard maps that were on the list, both of which have not been FC'd to this day. But we've gotten pretty close. Those from Who the Heavens Came has been choked so many times, it's honestly depressing. But it's definitely doable for a fair few players, with the ending, which is the hardest part of the map, being hit multiple times. And then, the oldest map in the entire game without an FC. The Apparition. The last bastion of this list that was created in 2016, having gone over 2,000 days without an FC. But that's because, well, the map's completely absurd. Still, despite this, the map went from Rapis getting a 32 miss and everyone being shocked, to Ryuke, who recently got a 3 miss on the map. And it seems like there might be a few players who could actually pull it off. And if both of these 2 maps were to be FC'd, that would finally leave Promethean Kings as the oldest ranked map without an FC, which would likely be a good resting point for the list, at least for the next few years. The goal of FCing every ranked map is almost a sort of dead art, since maps that don't even have passes have now been ranked. But the attempt to FC the oldest ones is still alive. And with the insane stories and scores told throughout this list, and how close it is to finally being complete, it's a story of overcoming everything, even with immeasurable odds. And I think that's pretty awesome.